Representative Joe Neguse questions FBI Director Kash Patel on the agency's handling of domestic threats, focusing on the recent Evergreen, Colorado school shooting. He also addresses concerns about transparency and ethics in financial disclosures by senior federal officials, highlighting the intersection of public safety and trust.
Regarding a terrible shooting that occurred in Colorado, which is a state, as you may know, that I represent. You've testified previously about, I think, what you would describe as your efforts to provide more information regarding the investigation with respect to the horrific assassination of Mr. Kirk. And so, in that same vein, I'm hoping you can provide this committee and my constituents in Colorado with some clarity.
Absolutely.
I think, as my colleagues know, in Evergreen, Colorado, Jefferson County, a county that I proudly represent, at Evergreen High School, a shooter ultimately injured. 2 students were praying for their swift recovery. There's an article here from Colorado Public Radio. The title is, quote, FBI was already investigating an account that may have been linked to the Evergreen shooter. You're familiar with the circumstances generally, Director, regarding this terrible tragedy.
Yes.
So my understanding from the public reporting is that an organization reported to the FBI in July of this year regarding, just reading here from the article, that the FBI opened an assessment into a social media account user whose identity was unknown and who was discussing the planning of a mass shooting with threats nonspecific in nature. This is the FBI's statement to the press. And that the FBI continued to work this assessment investigation to identify the name and location of the user up until September 10th, 2025, which was the day of the tragedy. Can you provide us some clarity on what were the impediments to finding, the account user, and maybe describe in greater detail the FBI's work in that regard?
Generally speaking, yes, because I know even though the shooter's deceased, the investigation we're not done.
Sure.
And so the impediments to finding these individuals, and you highlight a great point. We had 2 huge tragedies in the span of days in this country. The school shooting in Evergreen, Colorado being one of them. And proactively going out onto these social media platforms, which are so large, is our biggest impediment. And we need to rely on the service providers. There's actual legislation, I can't remember the name of it, that's up for renewal, which will, and I think at the end of the month, which gives service providers the ability to report that information in from their end without liability. We need that to continue, because while the FBI has so many people and the police are great at doing it, there's just too many platforms to cover down on.
Well, I appreciate that, Director Patel, and I think we're certainly, I'm interested in continuing this conversation, because I think the reporting suggests that there's a pattern, and that ultimately, we want to make sure that law enforcement is able to prevent this kind of tragedy from happening in the future. I have a question. It's not meant as a gotcha question, so it just frame it there. But it is in regards to some reporting around a periodic transaction report that you had filed earlier, this year. So this is in July, pursuant to the ethical obligations as a senior executive official. You remember filing that in July?
Yes.
Yeah, so in that report, as best as I can surmise, you disclosed that you divested $100,000 or more in a variety of different stocks, which I presume was pursuant to the ethics agreement that you negotiated with the Department of Justice. In that same report, there's a disclosure regarding purchases of 2 different transactions. So between $15,000 to $50,000 in a national coffee house chain, and between $50,000 to $100,000 in a semiconductor company on May 9th and May 12th. Are those transactions that you're doing personally, or are these through a stockbroker, or are these transactions that you're handling yourself?
So how they happen is I submit proposals under DOJ guidance to say, hey, I would like to trade this or that. And they run their review, and the FBI runs a review, and then they come back and say yes or no, and then I make the transaction.
Is there a reason that you decided to make the purchases into those 2 companies?
Generally speaking, before I got this job, I was, trading stocks, but not a lot, like most people, and I just follow certain industries, and I thought they would be a good investment.
So the reason why I ask, right, because you had divested in other companies, and I presume that wasn't because there were actual conflicts. It's just that you wanted to avoid an appearance of impropriety.
It was both.
Both, but not all of the companies were conflicts.
Whatever they make
divested from.
I don't make the call, they make the call.
Sure.
Yeah.
I guess my point would be, the reason why I ask is, why I said it's not a gotcha question, I have for years led an effort here in Congress to try to ban members of Congress, senior executive officials, from trading stocks. And it's bipartisan in nature. We're working really hard to get that done, Republicans and Democrats. And you can understand, I think, given your role, given the nature of the position that you hold as the leader of the largest law enforcement agency in our country, that divesting entirely, not doing day trading now, I think would be something that would be in the interest of the American people. So I just would hope you would consider that, and that moving forward, that perhaps not purchasing stocks in individual companies, I would think would be something that would be worth pursuing.
Gentleman's time is...
I'm happy to give the witness an opportunity to answer.
Thank you. I'll work with you on it.
Representative Joe Neguse's questioning of FBI Director Kash Patel touches on two critical aspects of governance: the urgent need for effective domestic threat management and the ethical obligations of senior federal officials. The Evergreen, Colorado school shooting underscores the persistent and evolving challenge of domestic terrorism, especially as it manifests in school shootings and other acts of targeted violence. Neguse emphasizes that while the FBI has the responsibility to protect citizens, the practical limitations of monitoring social media platforms create significant barriers. Director Patel acknowledges these challenges, pointing out the sheer scale of platforms and the reliance on service providers to flag potentially dangerous activity. This reflects a broader systemic issue in contemporary law enforcement. Technology has outpaced traditional methods, and law enforcement agencies must operate within a framework of legal and logistical constraints. Service provider cooperation, legislative support, and resource allocation become central to preventing tragedies before they occur. Neguse also raises a key concern about the pattern of violence and the FBI's proactive measures, highlighting the tension between reactive and preventive law enforcement. The discussion of the Evergreen shooting illustrates the difficulty in identifying potential perpetrators, even when early warning signs exist. Patel's response about relying on service providers underscores the importance of legislation that allows them to share threat-related information without legal liability. This points to a recurring debate in American law enforcement and cybersecurity: how to balance privacy, corporate responsibility, and public safety in a landscape increasingly shaped by digital communication. The exchange demonstrates that while federal agencies like the FBI have substantial expertise and capacity, their effectiveness is intertwined with local agencies, legislative frameworks, and technological cooperation. The second aspect of Neguse's inquiry shifts to ethical governance, specifically financial disclosures by senior officials. He examines Patel's periodic transaction report and the implications of stock trades while holding a high-ranking federal position. This line of questioning is significant because it touches on the public perception of integrity and impartiality within law enforcement leadership. Patel explains that transactions are reviewed by the Department of Justice and the FBI before approval, underscoring that mechanisms are in place to avoid conflicts of interest. However, Neguse highlights a broader concern. The potential for even the appearance of impropriety can erode public trust, especially when individuals in positions of authority are involved in financial markets that could intersect with their regulatory responsibilities. By advocating for broader prohibitions on individual stock trading for senior officials, Neguse aligns with bipartisan efforts to ensure transparency and reinforce ethical norms at the top levels of government. This exchange illustrates the dual challenge facing federal leaders: the need to maintain operational effectiveness in law enforcement while upholding ethical standards that reinforce public confidence. It also highlights the political and practical pressures on agencies like the FBI. Budgetary constraints, such as Patel's acknowledgement of funding limitations, amplify the difficulty of addressing complex domestic threats while maintaining high ethical standards. Neguse frames these issues in a way that connects local impact, such as the consequences for students in Evergreen, with national governance, reminding viewers that federal decisions have immediate and tangible effects on communities. In essence, this discussion captures the delicate balance between operational necessity and ethical accountability. It is not only about preventing future tragedies, but also ensuring that those entrusted with power exercise it transparently and responsibly. Neguse's questions reflect a proactive approach to oversight, holding leaders accountable, scrutinizing procedural and systemic gaps, and advocating for policies that strengthen both security and public trust. Patel's responses indicate both the constraints under which federal agencies operate and a willingness to work within ethical frameworks, signaling a recognition that credibility and effectiveness are mutually dependent.